Welcome back. From the sentence handed down to an Alberta mother for killing her two young sons to shocking website content and locking up prisoners in Calgary. Much to discuss with the Wednesday Crime Panel. Joining us this evening, retired criminologist Keith Spencer, defense lawyer Rod Gregory in as well tonight, and Jason Van Rassel, justice and social issues reporter with the Calgary Herald. Hello, Jason.
Hi, Michael.
6 years in jail. That was the sentence handed down this week to Alison McConnell, the Alberta woman convicted of manslaughter in the drowning deaths of her 10-month and 2.5-year-old sons. She is to receive credit for time served and will spend roughly 15 more months in custody. The Crown had been asking for a 12-year sentence. Rod, in handing down her decision, Justice Michelle Crichton said it is in society's interest that McConnell be punished and rehabilitated. Could the outcome of this case be interpreted as compassionate?
I'm not sure it's compassionate in the sense that she got off easy or anything like that. If you read the justice's decision, she makes specific findings of fact in relation to the medical evidence, and if you accept those findings of fact, the sentence is appropriate. And we have to remember that in the criminal code, there's no mandatory minimum sentence for manslaughter. So there are people who've received probation for manslaughter. So the Crown was seeking a 12-year sentence. If he had gotten his conviction for second-degree murder, the minimum sentence is 12 years imprisonment.
Jason, what combination of factors could have resulted in a different outcome here? Because certainly what did happen has met with a lot of criticism.
And a lot of times there is a disconnect between what the public perceives should happen and what the law says must happen. And you know, make no mistake, there's a complicated set of factors that go into sentencing. You have specific deterrence, which is deciding whether somebody or trying to prevent that person from committing the crime again. But there are also some wider considerations, and those are general deterrence and denunciation. For lack of a better way of putting it, sending a message to society about the crime that's been committed. And I think when you look at the sentence that's been handed down, that's where a large degree of the public's outrage comes from. We can say that maybe Ms. McConnell does have a large chance at rehabilitation, and there is some medical evidence there that shows that she may have had some diminished capacity as far as her intent goes. But I think what the public's really having a hard time dealing with is whether that societal message was there, that this is a crime that was serious, that 2 lives were taken. I think that's where the large degree of difficulty comes in looking at this sentence. And I think it's also important to remember the Crown is also appealing the conviction and the manslaughter finding and hoping to take it to trial again and perhaps get a verdict of second-degree murder the second time around on appeal.
Keith, your assessment, what is an appropriate sentence?
Well, I think it's very clear that the judge was treating this as an illness, not as a criminal act, and I think the sentence tries to reflect that. What I'm always brought back to is how the criminal justice system works. Now, if this was a young father, unemployed, stressed out, terribly distraught, and drowned his 2 young children in a bathtub, he wouldn't be charged with manslaughter. He'd be charged with first-degree murder, and he'd be convicted of first-degree murder. And I think the case illustrates the difference in treatment of men and women. It might also illustrate the difference between male and female judges. I just throw that in as a bit of an extra here, but it's a classic example of how men and women are treated differently. And in these cases, a man is a murderer and a woman is something else.
You're opening yourself up for some big criticism here, Keith.
The man...
Maybe he is, Michael, but the facts here in Calgary certainly bear that out. I looked at my 20-year database of homicides in Calgary. We had 5 fathers charged with killing their children who've gone before the courts in the last 20 years. In 5 cases, 5 findings of murder. We've had, actually, let me reverse that. I think it was, I'm going to look at this. Actually, it was 4. 4 cases where men were charged with murder and killing their children, 4 findings of murder. We've had 5 cases of mothers in Calgary who've gone before the courts charged with killing their children, charged with murder initially, 0 findings of murder. All manslaughter except for 1 that was a case of not criminally responsible. So, you know, Keith's opinion, although it may open up to him to some criticism, certainly has some bearing out in the facts, at least in the last 20 years here in Calgary, and we see it in the McConnell case.
Rod, you get last word.
Well, there was just a man in Edmonton who was found guilty of manslaughter for killing his wife, who was bedridden and an alcoholic, and he got a lower sentence than the case that we're talking about right now. So maybe that's just anecdotal, but he's a man, and he was given house arrest.
All right. Up next, the Alberta website sparking debate over what you should be allowed to view online. More with our Wednesday crime panel after the break. Welcome back to our Wednesday Vocal Point panel on crime. The gruesome murder and global manhunt that has everyone talking has an Alberta twist. Montreal police are said to be investigating the Edmonton owner of the Best Gore website for posting video allegedly showing the accused, Luca Magnotta, killing 33-year-old Jun Lin. Police say there is a good chance charges related to the publishing of obscene material could result. Keith, there are often disturbing and gory images from war zones, terrorist attacks. We see it in daily news coverage, whether it's in a newscast on TV or maybe in the paper. Should we be that shocked that a website catering to gore exists right here in our own Alberta backyard?
Absolutely not, because I don't think there's a subject and a presentation of a subject that out there in the world that isn't going to be part of somebody's website or exposed electronically. And I think one of the functions of this case ultimately will be a contest that decides what today's version of what is acceptable and unacceptable is. So every court case functions to do that, to draw the boundaries. What was obscene 20 years ago is kids' movies today. And so this kind of what we think is terrible today, maybe 10 years down the road,
acceptable,
will be acceptable. And so I think my interest in this case is this whole issue of defining acceptability. And of course, we're looking at each other and say, how could a guy make one of those? But the fact is, it is made. People are watching it, hundreds and thousands of hits probably. And it says something about where society is. And that's a function of these kinds of cases, to redefine where the boundaries lie.
So, Rod, if these boundaries are redefined and legislation changed to acknowledge that and make it easier for officials to pull a plug on a website like this one here in Edmonton, what would be the repercussions for the rest of us?
Well, it's interesting that depending on your political slant, you may find video of murder and killing in a war zone perfectly acceptable, but if you're of a different political bent, those videos could be construed as war crimes and equally as bad as this video. So the problem, I think, is our society's desensitized to violence. And ironically, the police got a tip from someone who saw this posting on the web. My question is, well, why didn't the guy who posted it contact the police? Even if he's going to post it, why not contact the police? Maybe that isn't his function, but...
Jason, do such websites have a role to play in our society?
I think when we're talking about depictions of war and things that come up like that, and certainly we see that in the media and the news business. Our job is to show these things in their full effect to people without necessarily censoring them. I think what we're talking about here is different, though. Sharper legal minds than me will decide whether that this has crossed legal community standards and is indeed obscene. But I think, as Keith said, it is a sad commentary that there is demand for this sort of things. And frankly, I found the website's owner's justifications for posting this stuff pretty nauseating. I mean, he said, yeah, the site exists to show these evildoers for what they do, and that it obviously served its function because people were led to the police were led to the killer by showing this on the website. Well, the obvious questions I have for this webmaster then is, why is the site called Best Gore if it's not somehow glorifying this sort of thing and sensationalizing it? And the other thing is if he really, really was interested in having the perpetrator or the maker of the video, the murder suspect, brought to justice, I'm sure he could have shown it in an edited fashion without all the gore, but just with a focus on who the suspect is. So, I mean, really, is there a place in our society to show the ugly side of society? Sure, and the media has that function. Is there a place in our society for videos like this? that's for the courts to decide. But I think, personally speaking, it's a sad commentary that there is demand for things like that out there.
All right, time for one last quick topic. After some discussion this week, police in Calgary have dropped the courthouse from a list of options being considered for a new holding facility, the result of opposition from local judges. Jason, Calgary police obviously looking for added space to house prisoners. What's the quick backstory here?
Well, we have downtown what's called the court services section, and this is just a facility when people are arrested. They're brought in, processed, fingerprinted, and prepared for either an appearance before a justice of the peace or a judge to go into court. And then from there, they're either released on bail or put into a holding facility like the remand center. The facility in Calgary is 50 years old. It's got a lot of outdated features that make it kind of dangerous both to staff and prisoners. Talking about things like bars in the cells that can be used as hanging points by people who are distraught, blind corners where the staff may be exposed to any kind of hidden danger. So they're looking around for another facility here in Calgary, and one of the things that was identified was a large cell block underneath our courthouse that has room for about 300 people. On any given day, there are far fewer people than that are brought down from the remand center, from prisons for court appearances. So because the facility is so large and so underused, it was thought that maybe Calgary Police could be using this facility, but our local judges said no. That, you think of the old Law and Order TV show where they say that the police and the courts are two separate entities. The judges believe those functions should be kept separate, and so they didn't want the police in there.
Okay, we're going to have to open up this particular can of worms on another day. We're out of time, and we'll get your opinions the next time. Retired criminologist Keith Spencer with us tonight, defense lawyer Rod Gregory, and justice and social issues reporter Jason Van Russell joining us from Calgary.